Okay, it is 10 o'clock. So welcome everybody. We will be presenting data sources for analytics. So we can go ahead and start. John and Crystal, thank you so much for being here. Please take it away.
All right, well, thanks everybody for being here. I feel a little out of my element. Even though I work for the county in the data kind of a role, I'm more came up the education side. So I was a teacher, principal, and I worked in the district office before I came to the county. So this is the hopefully, I don't want to say beginner or easier track, but it's not as advanced as some of the other presentations. So hopefully you're in the right place and we're going to share some information with you. I also want to welcome a person I work with, our data technician here at the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, Crystal. So we're going to go ahead and get started and kind of walk you through some slides here and present some things. We're going to jump in and out of the slideshow just to give you a chance to kind of get see some things. But I want to kind of start with things that we get asked all the time. And I even remember this as a school, at the school side and at the district level. You know, we get asked a lot of questions about data, and sometimes simple questions don't always have simple answers. So how many of you, if you want to put in the chat, can relate to some of these questions that are on that you see right now? Mary Lou is saying daily. Yep, Susie, you should definitely, I believe, know Susie does. Yep, so a lot of you kind of can relate to this. We got our own little world of acronyms and little different data sources, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, is sometimes where you can find answers to people's questions. That's kind of the key, is nobody likes asking, at least in education, we don't like being asked questions that we don't have an answer to. So if we don't have the answer, we'll find the answer. So I'm glad we're all on this same part here. So let's go on to the next part, which is going to be a poll. So this is our first poll, and it's going to basically be, how often are you asked to provide education related data? So feel free to go in and submit your response, please. Okay, can we show the results, please? All right, so this helps me with a little bit of who we have here. Obviously, the majority are asked on a daily basis to provide data, or once a week, and then a couple of people would never. So hopefully maybe we can get you up to speed and you can start contributing and providing data before they even know they need it. That's kind of one of our roles. If we can provide things before they even know we need it, that's what we try to shoot for. So it looks like we have a wide range of folks, but most are falling into the pretty much daily or weekly group. So let's go ahead and look at the next poll just to kind of get to know where you guys are at right now. So can we show our second poll of where are you working now? Okay, let's go and look at those results. Okay, so the majority are at a district level, some county and some school and some other. So no one at the state or federal. Okay, so that's good. All right, so that kind of helps me with things we're going to cover and how much time we're going to spend on them. Our agenda is going to be, we're going to explore several sources of education data, and we're going to show some examples of this as well. So you're going to see some sources that are out there and then kind of some projects we've done using these sources. And hopefully that'll make it a little more relative to you. We want to make sure that you're familiar with different sources and be able to locate them when you need to. So hopefully we'll accomplish those. So, the first question we always ask in education is like, where is this data coming from? So a lot of the data that LEAs look at, which are like school districts look at, they're submitting this data into Calpads. So typically most of your data, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, your most current data is always in your SIS. How many days, what's the attendance rate and what are the grades and our enrollment, those things are always in your SIS. To get them out of your SIS, your student information system, that's where it comes to Calpads. So I'll give you an example of how sometimes the lag can be between public data and what data you have at your site, since most of you are at a district. So in October, you have CBEDs, and that's kind of a count of students where they are at the time. It's be like the first week of October, typically. That data you have that day. You could run an enrollment report for that day and know exactly what your enrollment is that you're going to be reporting to the state through Calpads in their fall 1 report. And I'll just show you. So this was October. The fall 1 is due around December, and then it doesn't come out onto DataQuest, which is a site we'll look at in a minute. It just came out like basically a few weeks ago. So if you're looking at what your 2021 enrollment is, if you're waiting for it to show up in DataQuest, the year's almost over by the time it comes out. So just remember that there's kind of a path of stages of where data is, where you could have pulled the Calpads report or did an enrollment report on that day and got that information. So this just kind of gives you a little bit of information on where data is coming from. Starts in your SIS for the most part, gets reported through Calpads, but some of this thing gets reported directly from other sites like ETS. They're going to be reporting your SBAC scores. So you don't have to submit those. Those actually go straight from ETS. So just to give you a little perspective on where things are. And we want to talk, when we're talking about data, we always want to kind of put it in perspective of what it is. Data by itself is irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. You have to turn that data and turn it into information so that it's easy for people to understand. And when they understand that data, then they can create insight. Our goal and philosophy has always been, we want to create tools and provide data in a way that people can look at it and only spend minutes to determine what it's telling them. And then they spend most of their time doing something about it. Most of our educational leaders at the district level, site level, even the county level and state level, they don't want to spend an hour figuring out what this data means. They want to know what it means so they can do something about it. And so just to share this little graphic that I thought was really kind of a nice way of what the goal is here, is really to take people from data points to insight and action. That's really the key. Any questions about what we've done so far? Just drop them in the chat. We have someone monitoring that. I'm going to keep moving along. So one of the areas I'm going to start with is just kind of grouping some data. So there's sources of data about districts and about schools. And these are the questions. And I'm going to go in a second, jump out of here and kind of show you what we already put in there for you. But DataQuest is one of the main ones that you're going to use. It's pretty comprehensive. It can do a lot of things. The frustration with DataQuest is it tends to be pretty far behind. So if you need it right away, you're not going to find it in DataQuest. CDE also puts out student and school data files. Those are the files that we use to create some of our data tools. Typically when it goes into DataQuest, these are the files that they use, and they're released about the same time. There's also some dashboard files. Now, dashboard was a big thing. This past 2020 dashboard was really just some data files being released. 2022 dashboard will pretty much be the same thing. And then we also have a data crosswalk. So where you find those is the link we shared has a Google folder, and in the Google folder is the presentation we're doing today and a couple other pieces that we're talking about. So I wanted to make sure that you saw that. One of the pieces that we're not going to cover all of these. So again, you can just save this. You can add your own, make a copy of it, add your own to it later if you need to. But this again is just a document that I put together. It's hyperlinked with a little bit of description of some of the different ones that we're doing. And I'm going to go through and just kind of show you what those look like, give you a visual and kind of touch base on a couple of different things. But just know that you have this for reference later. We're not going to cover every single one on it. And some are really deep. You could spend a lot of time in DataQuest, for example. So in DataQuest, basically you can do county, state, district, whatever you want to do. We tend to do county, and I'll just show you what some of these look like. Again, you can follow along and do these as district if you want. And then these are all the types of reports that are in DataQuest now. So you've got your enrollment, which just like I said, came out a few weeks ago, CAASPP results, which is going to take you somewhere else. There's a bunch of different ones. I'm going to do enrollment right now just because that was released recently, but just know that there's a lot. Here's absenteeism, suspension, student counts. So you can kind of play with these and just see what's in there. But I'm just going to do as an example, the enrollment data. So you click submit. You get to pick the year. So you can see the year goes back pretty far. So if you wanted to do a 20-year trend in enrollment, it wouldn't be that hard to do with this. So I'm going to click our county. We're in San Bernardino County. You can click whatever you want. The reason we do this a lot is there's some options that you can pick. So I'll give you an example. So here's an enrollment with district data. So if we want to kind of look, San Bernardino is a pretty diverse district. We've got some very small districts, some very remote districts, some very big districts, very suburban districts. And so this is one I tend to use a lot. Hit submit, and it brings up data for you right away. And notice it's a summary for each district. So each district, it'll give you the breakdown. And at the very bottom, this is kind of nice too, is it will actually give you your county total and your statewide total. So if you wanted to kind of do a comparison between your district and the county and state, you don't have to do this one. This just gives you a range of all the districts at once. The other thing with DataQuest that's really powerful that you got to get into is these report options and filters. So from up here, you can switch to different reports. And different reports give you different options. So if you look over here, I can go and change from male to female. I can do student groups. I can change some of my numbers to percents. So like some of these numbers, it can actually be percents. So just know that when you're looking at this bottom part here, if it's not looking like you want, you can come in here and change some of these around. So if you wanted to switch these percents back to raw numbers, just click that button, it'll redraw, and now you're actually looking at numbers over here. If you wanted to look at a specific student group, you can go in here and pick a specific student group, and it refreshes it right off the bat. So this is really handy, and you can switch to different reports. And sometimes if you're not seeing it in like an overview one, you can switch to an individual report. And if I switch to out of district and I just go back to my ethnic breakdown, now notice my subgroups are already here, and it goes by grade as well. So now I'm adding in grade. So if I wanted a grade breakdown, so just kind of playing with some of the options that are available up here will give you a chance to kind of look at, find some of the data that you want. And again, down here at the bottom, you can see, obviously grade distribution is pretty equal, but ethnicity is not as equal. And so if you mouse over it, it'll pop up and kind of give you some information as well. So that's just a quick example of DataQuest. You could spend a lot more time in DataQuest. You could do all schools, charter, non-charter, your ELs, students with disability, just basically click and all these numbers get redone with this. So if you basically did a district report level report, it's very helpful to get this data. But again, you're waiting till, basically it was like the third week in April before this became available. And you probably are going to want to know these numbers way before that for your district. Okay, so that's DataQuest. Any questions on DataQuest? You can spend a lot of time. We spend probably, I don't know, Crystal, what do you think? Probably about a quarter of our time getting data from DataQuest. And this is what a lot of people will ask, how many kids do we have here? How many are in this grade or that grade? This is a quick, easy way to go do it. Question we have in the chat is about, is it downloadable? And what I found is it doesn't have like a download link in here, but if you copy, you can actually copy and paste this right into a spreadsheet. So if you just highlight this, you can actually copy and paste it, and it does a pretty good job of pasting in. Sometimes it's a little off. The data files we're going to show next that make these up are actually the ones you can download. So thank you for that transition, David. So the next one I'm going to show you is the downloadable data file. This is new. The link I originally had on this site changed. So if you haven't visited CDE lately and looked at it, you're going to say, oh, this looks different. They've kind of put them in by topics and categories now. Before it was a long running one that was a little bit harder to keep track, but these are the actual downloadable files that you were kind of looking at. And some of these can be pretty big. So if you wanted to look up, let's see, we were doing enrollment. So let's stick with the enrollment, but you can see these are the different types of data files that are available. Your dropout and graduate rates, your ELs, student discipline, assessment stuff. So all these files are in here that you can actually download. So we're going to go to annual enrollment again. And you can see it tells a little bit more. It just gives you another link to another link. And this is census day. So that was that. We were talking about CBEDS day. That's census day, same thing. And enrollment by school. You can look at your TK enrollment. Here's some historical stuff. This was really interesting to go back and look at, like, who were they counting in 1948, and what was the size of school districts back then. So it was kind of fun to play around with if you want. If you click on that, basically you can see the different years of data that they have. And then this is for the file structure. It's going to kind of tell you what all the different columns are. So how, what are you getting in this file and what does each column mean? So that's always worth kind of looking at. But if you click on this is actually the data file that you'll download. I'll click on that really quick. And that's the file that you would actually download and import into Excel. You can see it's downloading as a text file. Typically what you do is in Excel, you'll just open an Excel file and you'll import it in, and it'll ask you to make sure all the columns line up nice and neat. So we'll save that for another day, but that's where you're going to find some information. The dashboard files were another example I was going to show you. And here's what the dashboard files look like. Again, there's a link in the presentation for it, but there's also a link in the Google Doc that we shared. You can see here's the record layout. So the layout's going to tell you what they all mean. And it's important to kind of go through that record layout because, if you do this a lot, you know that 1 is ELA and 2 is math, but then you might have records that have like 6 and, or 5s or, numbers that you may not be, comfortable with. And this will kind of just tell you in this column, this is what the values mean. And then this is the data file. Again, this one you can do it as an Excel or you can do it as text. Depends on what you're going to do with it. But, again, here's more data files that you can do with local indicators. Here's your EL participation. Here's math participation, chronic absentee. So any of these indicators will pull up a data file. It's a big data file. It's got, tens of thousands of rows, and it's for the whole state. So you're going to want to do a find to find your district and then maybe copy it and paste it out. We do it by county. So, imagine, there's like 58 counties in the state. And so we're looking for number 36 because that's ours. And then we basically, hide all the rest or delete them out or copy and paste whatever you want to do just so we can focus on just our district. So, but this is where you would find you can see there's a lot: grad rate, suspension, enrollment, all these different measures. So we just want to kind of give you a visual of what it looks like. And then from here, basically you click this link, it's going to download a file for you. And then you can start working with that file in Excel or Power BI or whatever you're going to use. And so the last one I wanted to kind of show you is a document that's in the folder. And this is a data crosswalk that shows data between the dashboard and DataQuest. So sometimes you're like, well, how, I'll give you grad rates as a good example. So you're going to notice sometimes that the grad rate might not match in the dashboard compared to what you're getting from DataQuest or your numbers that you're getting. So this kind of explains where this data is coming from, what measure they're using, because there's a couple different grad rate numbers, and how they relate to each other. So this is kind of a nice handy document that somebody else put together that was really nice because, again, you can look at grad rate, what are they counting, where is it found, So anyway, this is a nice little handy little guide that we wanted to kind of walk through and show you. Any questions about the slides, the data sources? Again, there's more. I'm sure you want to spend more time kind of playing with it and looking through it, but we definitely want to just give you a visual of kind of what does it look like. But this data crosswalk is really helpful when you're looking at two different data sources and how are they connected. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to jump back to the presentation and talk about the last one, and that was student information system. So remember at the beginning, I talked about your student information system. And again, I'm not going to show that because it's different for every district. Most of you are in a district. So getting to know your SIS and know what reports and features it has can get you that data early on so that you're able to make sure that, I'll give you an example with, I had when I worked in a school district, when I first got there, suspensions weren't always getting, and expulsions weren't always making it into the SIS, which meant they didn't make it into the Calpads report. So when we'd get our Calpads report, it didn't look right. And then we had to kind of backtrack and chase it. So a lot of times you can kind of check this data in your SIS to make sure that it's good as it's being uploaded into your Calpads, because sometimes your Calpads person may not have the context to understand, does that number look right? and having it, making sure they kind of eyeball that and check it before they upload it into their fall. Because sometimes what happens in Calpads is, oh, I didn't get any errors, so it must be fine. Well, you can have the wrong data and still not get errors. So you want to make sure that your data, so when we had like 0 expulsions being uploaded into Calpads, but we knew that wasn't the case, we had to fix it in the SIS, and unfortunately this had been done for years, and so we weren't able to change it. Another couple of our districts this year, their data was pulled for a graduation rate, and it was pulled when they weren't complete. So it basically pulled an incomplete data set, so it looked like their grad rate was like 20% or something, really super low. And they were like, well, how'd that happen? And they weren't able to get that fixed. So every time we put a report out that has to do with grad rate, your college and career indicator, all these things all go back to grad rate, right? We had to asterisk that their data set was incomplete. So making sure that things in your SIS are good before it gets to Calpads will help make sure that it gets into these other sources and it'll be accurate. Yeah, so again, the time to review. So great question, Mary Lou. So the Calpads, you get to know your Calpads person because they'll make or break you with this. They used to upload your data and then they processed it and there were reports you could pull back and there was like an amendment window. Now what they're doing is they're just giving you more time. They just kind of took away that amendment window. So you really have to look at your Calpads reports to make sure that they're looking good before those capture dates, because once they pull it, they don't go back and change it. And we had a couple of districts that were very frustrated because their data was wrong and they were working on it and now it's right, but the state would not pull it again. So it's getting more critical to get it right the first time. All right, so I'm going to jump down to an example of where we took some of the data and we made a tool for you guys, for our districts to use. So when it came to the dashboard, one of the things that a lot of times people come up with questions, and my wife spent a week, this kind of inspiration was kind of my wife. She spent a weekend trying to find schools that were like her school, that were doing better than her. And unfortunately, the current dashboard, you basically just had to know the school you were looking for. So we made this tool by uploading the dashboard files into a Power BI tool. And this is kind of the directions for how it works. But so far, people have been it's pretty easy to kind of work and figure out. So the thought behind this tool was take the data file and put it into a way that makes it super searchable so that people can go in and actually define things. So I'll give you an example with number of students. If you're a big school or a small school, you can kind of adjust these numbers and it'll automatically go through and sort for you. So you don't, if you're a small school, you probably don't want to compare yourself to a big school or vice versa. The other thing is like with your socially disadvantaged students, if you're like 80% socially disadvantaged, you don't want to compare yourself to schools that have like 5%. So you can adjust this slider up and you can adjust these sliders down so that you can kind of tune it. I don't know if you've been around doing this a while, you probably remember similar schools, and we get the similar school rankings and we look at it like, yeah, right. Those are nothing like our schools. Well, this kind of allows you to go in and kind of adjust your sliders. Then you can adjust whether you want to look at all the county. And the goal with this was, we did our geo region because we wanted it to be close enough that you could go visit them. So if you find a school that looks like you, that's doing better than you in a certain indicator, the chances you want to reach out and find, hey, what are you guys doing differently that we're not doing? Because, if we equalize our student populations, their performance should be the same, right? So you can go in here, and again, I'll just pick San Bernardino, and notice that the number is just changing every time you do it. And we did school type too, because if you're a high school, you don't want a list of elementary schools. That's not really going to help you. So if you're an alternative school, same thing. So this kind of allowed you to go through and check and search things. You can do it by individual student groups. So if you were in CSI because your African-American subgroup wasn't doing well in a certain area, then this will allow you to find other schools like yours that are doing better. So right now, the little sliders over here these are the dashboard indicators. So if you were looking for, say, math, and you're saying, we were a 2, and we wanted schools that were a 3 and a 4, you just adjust the sliders over here and it resorts everything for you. What we also did was we added, like, if they're a charter or not, we added the enrollment, and then we added the other indicators as well too. So if you're looking for math, schools that were doing better than you in math, I did English language arts. locate, let's do the English language arts, sorry. You can resort it here. And so here's 2 schools that, here's their population, here's there are 3, but there are 2 in math. Here's their suspension, here's their chronic absenteeism, and here's their LP number as well. So it gives you a really quick way of looking at, are they comparable to us in other areas without having to go and change the sliders. So again, you can just slide, and if you're like going, so if your school is like not showing up, if you go all the way out, because it depends if it's a small subgroup, you might want to, there's schools that are zeros, and by putting this on 1, you were filtering out all the schools that got a 0, meaning they didn't have enough students to count. So this is just an example of a way that you can take those data files and turn them into tools that allow people to actually get information and play those what if questions. So again, you can change any element that you want in here, and it instantly just changes the data for you. So you can pick to a different group, go back to all students, you can pick homeless, you can pick, whatever you want to pick. It's going to respond instantly and give you that information so that you can see how you take that tool and the publicly available data and put it into a tool. So we have a question from Tracy. Tracy, this is a tool that we created for our geo region. So the link is available for you to play with in the chat, but we didn't make it statewide, but you could take those same data files for your county or your district and create this tool as well. So good question. So I'm going to jump out of this right now and keep moving along. Hopefully this is worthwhile. But our goal was just to kind of give you an example of there's these files, and this is what you can do with those files. So another area that you can kind of group student data in is student performance. And so in student performance, you're going to be looking at like summary data files. So your summary data files are a little different with CAASPP. Because they're publicly available than what you might get out of TOMS. So if you went into TOMS, we made some tools where we actually got the data file from TOMS, which is student level data. There's a record for every single kid. And we created a different tool for that allowed our districts to kind of play like what you saw. There are also the CDE data files. We kind of showed you where those were. We showed you the dashboard files as well. And then again, Calpads has some reports. So I'm going to jump back out of here. Just kind of keep going down my tabs and bring it down a little bit so I can see. So this is the CAASPP data file, and this is what it looks like. So again, this is the summary, and you can pick you can see the different years that are available to pick. You can pick information on all groups, or you can pick student groups. And then basically when you pick this, it's going to open up a text data file like an Excel, and then you'll be able to kind of, you can do a pivot table with it. You can bring it into like a Power BI or a Google Data Studio or Tableau or another visualization program. But this will allow you to basically access those files, and you can see, if you were a special ed team wanting to know what accommodations are being used most, this would be a great way of doing that. Say your district tends to use one accommodation way more than the rest of the state. That might be something you kind of wonder, why is that the case? How are your special ed students doing, economically disadvantaged. So again, how are EL students doing? Their data files are kind of broken down, or you can do all. It's a really big file because it contains all of these groups for everything. So like in your like in gender, you'll have male and female, but you'll have that for every single school, okay? And they can be big when you're looking at it by county, by district, by school, and then you add in things like ethnicity. All your different ethnic groups all have records as well too. So it's a pretty big file to kind of use. The other one that you're going to see, again, downloadable data, we've looked at that one already. Lots of things to play there. And again, these are a review, but then again, here's your dashboard files as well. And your dashboard files have your ELA and your math indicators that are built on that. So basically you take your CAASPP results and they convert it into the dashboard, and the dashboard is going to convert it into numbers. So your numbers, like we showed before on our tool, it's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 thing. So again, and that's based on your dashboard. So again, there's a little bit of overlap between those two. So what we're going to do right now is the other piece I wanted to touch on was the Calpads part. And in your folder, there's a little Calpads data and how it's used and the consequences. So this just kind of tells you, here's your fall 1, what's reported in fall 1, what goes to the state, where is it going to show up, Here's the federal part. And so this kind of just makes you a whole new appreciation for your Calpads person. Do we have any people that are Calpads people in here? You just put your in the chat if you are the Calpads person, because you probably know this really well. But a lot of times people outside of Calpads don't know this. A recovering Calpads person, yes, I'm in that category too. So I was super happy to get a person who was really capable to do it. And so Calpads cycle is you've got fall 1 where they do enrollment. Fall 2 is when they're doing staffing and coursing. And then these are all your end of the year courses and your end of the year reports that you do. And this is where you put in course completion, program completion, your grads, all that kind of stuff. Chronic absenteeism because your attendance is now done. So these are really important. You can just see this was a great little document for you to understand. So all these Calpads person, you can kind of give them a big high five when you see that fall 1 is done or fall 2 is done or year 1, because it's a lot of work to do. So we got Amy's going to return back to Calpads, and I know Hector all too well. You're really lucky to have him. So that's just the other document I wanted to share with you. And I think I had a little screenshot for Calpads. I do. So this is just a screenshot from Calpads to show all the different types of reports that they have. So there's reports and there's extracts. So once the data comes out of your SIS and you import it in, then you can start looking at different types of reports. But I just wanted you to know, so you can look at your, primary enrollment by subgroup really early on. It's a part of the fall 1 kind of report. And these are all these little numbers. Your Calpads person, they live and breathe all these numbers. But here's like your enrollment. It's by disaggregated enrollment. Here's all this information that's being reported to Calpads all the time that you can pull. So just know that if you need something and it's not in your SIS, but it came from your SIS, looking at your Calpads reports is a great practice to get into, because this is what is going to be reported and is going to show up in DataQuest later. And it's going to show up in other places too. So again, just want to do a quick screenshot to show you, here's an extract. This is kind of what it looks like. And now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Crystal, who's going to give you an example that she created for our counties that uses some of these data files as well.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick review of how we've used CAS data files. So after we download them and we just pull out San Bernardino County, we wanted to give our districts something that they can use at their level to demonstrate where they're at. And so this is one of the pages that we created for them with those data files. One of the questions that we were asked the most was, oh, can you give me district A, B, and C in one graph? And so we wanted to give them, instead of paper documents, we wanted to give them a dynamic data visualization where they can choose themselves the districts that they wanted to display. So let's see if this loads. And so I'm going to choose all the elementary districts in San Bernardino County. And so you see how only the elementary districts that we wanted to display are being displayed in the graph. So they're able to see how they're doing compared to other districts within our county, as well as the county comparison right next to them. They're able to go by grade level. So if you wanted to just see 11th or 8th graders, how they're doing, you can quickly view those. And you can also change years, if it allowed me to. You can change years and student groups. So we're able to give that at their fingertips, and they don't have to go into the research file to look for these numbers. It's already available for them to look these numbers up and give these quick numbers to their superintendent or assistant superintendents. Again, this is only for San Bernardino County, so you will only find districts for that for our county. And so we've taken all these files and given them a lot of that data visually instead of the tabular form that we're used to, or the circular form that the CAS website gives us.
So you can imagine after building this, how disappointed we were that we weren't going to have new CAASPP data to add to this last year. And again, we're not going to have new data to add to this year. So, sometimes you build a great tool and then things happen. So when we do get back into that realm of doing CAASPP testing and having reliable data that we can look at, we can just add it into this tool. Obviously, it'll be a bit of a gap, but we wanted to just show you taking the data file and putting it into this makes it a lot more accessible for people and makes it something that hopefully is a little bit more meaningful and valuable that they can actually look at, get some insights, and then go, oh, great, I'm going to do something about that. So that was the slide we just kind of covered. We use dashboard files, CAS files, and even LPAC files to make interactive tools. And then that's a link to it, so you can kind of see if there's something like that. And the last part that we're going to leave you with is a couple of other sources that kind of were interesting. And so one of them is going to be the race to submit. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Regional data source. So sometimes you don't, there are regional sources out there creating things that are really, really valuable. And I wanted to share one with you. And then some national sources. So I'm going to jump out and show you those really quick. Race to submit is one of those websites that just made life so much easier when I was trying to find some data. In the past, we'd always be asked, how many of our kids completed their FAFSA and what schools? And you had to go into their system, and their system was really archaic and it was really difficult to use. And it was kind of almost frustrating. So when this came out, I was like, this is great. So if you haven't seen the site, this is actually the time of the year when your schools, especially your high schools, are wanting to know, are their kids, how are our kids doing? Have they submitted, because you ask the kids, oh yeah, sure, we did it. This will actually give you a little graph showing you exactly how many kids throughout the whole state. But then what you can do is you can actually go in and filter it. You can actually go in and filter by a district. So I'm going to check the chat right now, and the first person that puts their district name in, we'll check out their district. So who do we have? Okay, Maricopa. Can you find it? Oh, it didn't pop up. All right, so it's going to want me to choose from one of these. Let's narrow it down a little bit more. Okay, Maricopa High. All right, perfect. So this is Maricopa High, and right away you can see they've got a very high rate of turning in the FAFSA, and they've completed it, and they've got their Calpads. But this is what the kind of thing that's neat. Well, you can see how many, oh, that's a really small school. Gives you the numbers, but what's also kind of nice, and I actually was pulling this for someone, is it gives you this little data. You've got, obviously got some graphs down here, but this data table piece was really helpful as well too. So let's see if we can find Maricopa Unified. Again, you feel free to put in yours. So there's Maricopa Unified, and maybe we'll get some more students here. Oh yeah, definitely a lot more students here. You can see the rate, it obviously drops a lot more when you're including the whole district. And then let's go to our data tables again. You can see this was their high school enrollment. This is the count of submitted, and so that's the percentage, and that's what it's based on. So you can go in and look at, how did that compare to last year? How, let's compare both of them side by side. So this was just a nice quick way. So if you're in a district and you want to get that, you're going to get this question answered, where are we at? How many do we have left? This kind of gives you a quick, easy way to get that data without having to go into the system, count everything up, figure out who submitted, but who hasn't completed. There's submitters and there's completers, and then there's the awards. So in this case, you could see, you had 102 people have applied, and then 197 have actually, gotten their award. So you kind of know there's a couple of people that haven't completed yet. So, and you can see right here, so it tells you the difference between the two. So this was just a nice little site that I thought was really useful. It saved me, I wish I had it, because it would have saved tons and tons of time. The next site I'm going to show you is one of a community group in the Inland Empire, which is basically San Bernardino and Riverside County. We have an organization called Growing Inland Achievement, and their goal is, if we get all it's a collaborative impact kind of thing. And so if we get all the interested parties on board and we all have an impact on, better outcomes for our students, that results to better outcomes for our communities and our businesses and, everything as a whole. And so they actually had this data and they're using some data that, secondary data, workforce investment data. So sometimes you're asked about, things that you don't need to come up and create the whole, recreate the whole wheel. You have other places out there that are doing this. And so this is just an example of where they went in with, where are jobs, are they, what jobs are growing, what's the differences over years, and you can come in here and you can, again, adjust different variability, different schools and things like that. But they also have some other ones that are really great too. So here's one on, here's the 5 growth areas. Here's high annual job openings. Here's highest median income. So these are all things that in the education world we don't really track and pay attention to as much. But I could see where counselors or people at the Career Center, or even just members in your community and board members would really be interested in kind of finding this out. Because again, our students are funneling into higher ed and into the work world. And are we, if we're focusing on STEM, but in our area it's more healthcare, we should know that. So that's just another source. And the last source I'm going to share with you is a national source. And the NAEP is the National Assessment of Education Progress. Now, I thought this was kind of ironic, and this is just me, that in California, we were told that we couldn't waive our state testing. We had a lot of flexibility, but we couldn't waive it. And yet the NAEP was the national one, and that was canceled. But the NAEP has a lot of good information about it. Here's a data explorer that you can go in and look at subjects and grades and even areas to get some data on a more national basis. What's great about this is it's hard to compare, say, Texas to California, or California, because we give different tests and the different measures. The NAEP is one thing that's kind of universal across the board. So if you're kind of looking at maybe some long-term education trends, or what kind of things people are taking, they have a lot of data here, and this was just a great source for that kind of nationally. Then you can look at state, then you can look at county, and then you can look at your district, and then you can look at your schools and have that perspective on where things are. So that was the last one that I wanted to kind of share with you guys. Yeah, we're there. The last thing I want to leave you with is just to, something, it's my own philosophy. Like I said, I'm coming into this data role from the classroom essentially. And so just to keep in mind that, every time we look at data, just to, our world, most of the time we're talking about kids, every one of these data points is actually a kid. And so if you keep that perspective, the data becomes more personal and becomes hopefully more actionable and more meaningful. So just wanted to kind of share this quote that kind of enforces that. And with that, I'm going to leave you with any questions. If you want to put some in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, we want to thank you. Here's our contact info in case you have any questions later. But again, in the shared folder, you have access to all the documents, the presentation that we shared. So we really appreciate you spending time with us. We hope this was worth your while and was right at your level. Like I said, some of the other sessions they're above my head. I'm still learning along with it, but we wanted to make sure that we at least hopefully this is something you might be able to make your job a little bit easier, because many of you probably wear many hats and your job is hard enough. We don't want to make it any harder. So thank you. Anything, Crystal?
I think there were just 2 questions. Is the data visualization all done into the Power BI? And did your staff?
Crystal, you are muted.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions. One about the visualizations we used. They were done in Power BI, but we also can use Tableau, but Power BI is the one we tend to lean toward a little bit because we know it a little bit better. And the other question, Crystal?
Did your CLE staff have internal expertise for this project?
So the question was, did our office have, or just county office have expertise in it? Yeah, so Crystal obviously had a lot of expertise in pulling these data and creating reports. I came in with having some background at a district level of creating some of these visualizations. And so we've learned a lot more along the way, and there's a lot more functionality and really cool features that are coming out in these programs all the time. And the great thing about Power BI, to get started, it's like zero cost. So it's absolutely free to do it and use it. And then if you share your data to the web, just make sure it's no PII in it. But then if you share it to the web, you can share it to as many people as you want through a link. So you don't have to spend, a lot of money to be able to use this. And there's tons of videos out there on how to use the program. So again, it just helps sometimes taking those rows and columns of numbers and turning that into graphs and pictures and interactive things that people can play what ifs with. So thank you for those questions. Otherwise, we appreciate you guys being here. Again, you have our email and contact info here if you have any other questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the sessions. I know that we're going to, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John and Crystal. Great presentation.